Joining us to talk about the upcoming school year and some changes at Watertown City School District, Dr. Larry Schmiegel, the Superintendent of Schools. Good to see you.
Nice
Appreciate
to see you
being here. School year just around the corner, and you had kind of a curveball thrown at you with recent flooding. I'd like to start there. Give us the status of the buildings and what kind of damage there was and what's been fixed and what students will see when they come in.
So thank you very much for this opportunity to speak with you today and to give our community an update of the status. We are in a good place, and again, that was definitely a curveball, but as Bob Hagerman said to me when I arrived at the Watertown City School District, I'd take all of my curveballs the first couple of years with the windstorm and other issues. But as it relates to the water issue, we took on about 3 inches of water at the lower level of the high school. Our LGI took about 2 feet of water, just slightly more than that. That space currently is being re-sheetrocked. The tile floor has been removed in many of the spaces downstairs. They drilled holes throughout each of the classrooms in order to make sure that the moisture was out and that we weren't creating a space inhabiting mold. So those spaces are done. We are currently in the process of working with FEMA and Homeland Security on those reimbursements. We're looking at probably about a $4.3 million cost estimate. We're still waiting on some contractors to scope our plumbing systems to see with how they interact with the city storm drains, if there's anything that's blocking those, so that we, my bigger concern is like community perception. Whenever we invest money in our schools, I really want the community to trust the process that we're taking. And when we look at a $4.3 million renovation to that space that was damaged as a result of Debbie, I really want the community to trust that we're investing in something that we're not going to need to go back in a year later to put more money into. And so I had a wonderful meeting with our mayor, I had a wonderful meeting with our Homeland Security. And so the hope is actually to discuss mitigation efforts. We're looking at, could we look at a retention pond, a holding tank, something that in the event, if the storm drains on Washington Street aren't able to hold the amount of water that's coming down, I think it was over 2 inches per minute, or per hour, excuse me. We want to be able to hold that water and be able to release it when those storm drains are active and working.
So divert it somewhere so that it's not coming into the school.
Just a temporary holding place.
You know, you came from a school district in southern Florida, so you know about rain and how that can add up. And here you are in northern New York. You're still a native of upstate, right?
Yes.
So you know about snow and that sort of stuff. But did you ever think that you would have to deal with a flooding?
I did not. As a matter of fact, many of the people, and we have custodians in that building that have been in our district over 30 years, and they said, you know, we're familiar with how to deal with ice. We're familiar with how to deal with snow, but this is, you know, and I said, well, calm down. You know, I spent 7 years living in the Keys and hurricane seasons and dealing with hurricanes and flooding. But our schools here were not built to withstand that kind of water.
Yeah.
But we want to make sure that our schools are safe. And right now, our floors are ready, our walls are ready. We're going to accept students back on the 5th in that high school, and we feel that it's going to be a safe space for them. There will be some things, some noticeable things. Our gymnasium flooring will need to be replaced. That's about a $1 million ticket item. That will not be able to be done before school starts, but the space is usable. Our LGI may not be usable by next week, even though they're telling me that it should be. They were just putting sheetrock up yesterday, but we have temporary placements in place to house students that would be in those areas. We kind of learned through COVID what COVID did to students and having them outside of school, and so we wanted to do everything within our power to get our kids back on our campuses.
Back to the gymnasium. Last that I heard that you were going to be able to save it, and you thought that would be a savings. Has that changed?
So that was, you know, that really, when Serpro came in and they put lines underneath the floor, there's a soil ground underneath that gymnasium, and so with the amount of rain that we received after the fact, it just kept putting moisture into the space. When the Homeland Security representatives came in through emergency services, they said we've never seen the amount of water on a gym floor and actually not replace it. There are some wrinkles in the entrance of the gymnasium floor, but it wouldn't inhibit our students from using it from an athletic perspective or even a PE kind of setting.
So you can use it right now as you start up the school year, but the plan is to replace it at some point then?
Absolutely.
Gotcha.
So we're looking at, so we kind of took a different approach to some other districts that faced the water. We're actually looking out and applying for a RAN, a revenue anticipation note. So we're going to actually use those funds to help pay for these. It takes just over a year to probably get the FEMA money in. That only covers 75% of the damages if we're to be approved for that. And again, we're still going through that application
process. Yeah, you're waiting
process.
for that too to be declared, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we're looking at applying for that revenue anticipation note. I had it at last week's board meeting. That allows us to borrow money at 4%. and it allows us to continue with our savings, earning interest at 5%. So financially, it made a
Pays
better
for
move.
itself.
Absolutely.
You and Rebecca Dunkel have had a relationship here, Lowville
Yes.
Superintendent. She's doing a flood evacuation plan. She's now putting that into effect, or at least coming up with some kind of an idea, because all of this happened without kids in the school. Is Watertown doing the similar thing, or did you have something that you're able to pull out of the file cabinet and be like, hey, this is what we can do?
The class, and she has classes that are combining spaces. Is I think I heard the number 6 classes are combining spaces on those lower levels. We don't have, in our district, we don't have a building that's closed that we still own that we could use. In some districts they have swing spaces, so that would be something that we would have to consider. Room utilization, it doesn't come easy from the adults, but how we look at our classrooms and how they're being used. Maybe I'm teaching, odd periods and not even, or maybe I have a couple of blocks throughout the day. So it would be creative scheduling to really remove students off that the lower level. We are going to be looking at going to our community for a capital project. That was actually in the works before we received, as you said, the curveball. And so we're looking at $85 to about $110 million worth of capital projects. The high school is going to be a big ticket item. And looking at over the A wing of possibly adding a second floor that could alleviate some of those classrooms that are on the lower level may also be a possibility.
What about the point of my last question? And just to be clear, do you need a plan? So if the flooding happens with kids in the classroom, do you have to come up with a new evacuation plan or something like that?
So if there was a flooding during schooling, we would remove those students and bring them to the auditorium, the cafeteria, anything above ground.
Easy enough. You have that plan in place.
Absolutely.
So parents can relax and know that there's something in place to be able to do that.
Absolutely.
I want to talk about the capital project. If I can just ask a couple of questions on that. That's a big number. If it's $110 million, that's one of the largest projects for the North Country and definitely for Watertown. Can you give us a couple of the highlights of what it would do?
So we're still going through the building condition survey. One of the things that when I got here, we were undertaking the turf field, which is going to be opening tomorrow. We're excited about that. We also had an additional $13 million project that had a little bit of work at the high school, a little bit of work at Case Middle School, and then Wiley was probably the most noticeable renovations that we worked on in the lower level there. When I realized that those were going to be coming off the books and we needed to move in another direction for capital projects and working with our school board, it was evident to me that, similar to my comment earlier about being fiscally responsible, to me it didn't make sense to go forward and bring a capital project forward without having our BCS report done. That stands for Building Condition Survey. New York State requires that to be done every 5 years. So it was critically important for me to actually get that input prior to going to the community for a capital project. In this case, it's going to be many capital projects because our buildings are outdated. They need repairs. We're looking at a lot of mechanical things, roofing structures, windows, doors, those kind of things. We have a couple of buildings that need single point of entries installed so that they meet the expectations for school safety and security. So those things are going to come to the forefront. We do have 2 buildings that came to the front as far as needing repair, North Elementary School and the high school. So on the 9th of September, I'm actually taking our school board on a bus tour. So we'll be going with our architects, King and King, and we'll be riding around to all 9 facilities in our district to really get the board to see what items we identified as high priority. As I said, and you identified the $110 million is a big project number. When you look at our facilities and you look at the low, medium, and high priorities, although the tour is going to focus on the high, they came over $170 million. And so we're not going to be able to do $170 million worth of work. So there's some prioritization that's going to be taking place with our school board to really identify and narrow that scope down.
Any sort of building, as you said, maybe a second floor?
We're looking at the high school. When you look at one of the things that you can do when you're looking at capital projects is you can look at the density of the buildings, the student population. We're in a predicament where our buildings are capable, according to the state, we may not necessarily agree with the answer on that, but that our capacity would house maybe 200 more students or 300 more students in a particular building. So when it comes to the aid reimbursement piece, us going to the state and simply saying, well, we want a new survey as far as student enrollment to increase our aid, it would actually have an adverse effect. And so where that comes into play is looking at adding square footage. The aid ratio is not going to be, at 90% if we're looking at adding square footage to a space that technically, according to the state, should be able to house more. What we know, and it's a good problem to have, we have a lot of community partners that push into our school districts, into our schools, and so they're taking up space that traditionally years ago we didn't have, maybe Pivot Services or Cornell Services in our building, and we're excited to have all of those services to meet the diverse needs of our students. So we're having to work with finding spaces for those agencies, but also finding additional instructional spaces.
So, and people should know if it's $110 million or whatever that number is, it doesn't fall on the local taxpayer entirely. It's
No.
state aidable. The state can pitch in a lot of, is there a percentage
Absolutely.
that it would be, or you're hoping
so the
for?
state aid, I'm going to give you a rough guesstimate, is about 90.6% for Watertown. That's based on our poverty rate in our district.
Yep.
So that's a pretty high rate compared to some of our other districts in our region. But the other thing that's significant for our taxpayers to know is that over the years we opened up a capital reserves fund. At the end of last year, as a fiscal management tool, I moved more money into that account, so we capped it out at $10 million. And so we're projecting up to $110 million project. With our $10 million reserves, we'll have zero additional tax implications to our community.
It'll cover that, what is left over from the 90%,
Yes.
10% on the local, it will cover that.
And we're also hoping to tie into, we weren't planning this, but with the issue that happened with the flooding, with those FEMA dollars, there were things that maybe would have been identified in that lower level, like mechanical items, our sub pumps and those things that were flooded. Those things are now, we're going to be able to bring those up to code with the support of our government to fund that, so those monies can now be diverted in a different direction.
So FEMA might cover some of the things that would have been in the capital project.
That's what our thoughts are.
New school year starting up soon. How is staffing? It's always a challenge. Is it the same as it has been? Has it been better this year? Do you have a lot of openings?
It has been this year, and I don't want to jinx it, I don't have a wood table to knock on, but we are in a better place than our district has been in many, many, many years. I am so proud of our entire district, our staff, our teachers, our administrators that have spent their summer sitting on interview committees, my assistant superintendent of personnel and student services. They have been doing around-the-clock interviews. We've had teachers join our district this year for this upcoming year that are leaving districts after 20 years, 25 years, 26 years, 27 years to join the Watertown City School District and be a part of our next step.
You lit up right there
Yes.
when I asked you about staffing. You're really proud of that.
I am extremely proud of where we're at because we have never been in this predicament as a district to be this staffed. So we are, I don't want to jinx it, but we're ready to open and we're ready and excited to bring our kids back.
You have something new that you're doing, Cyclone Academy. I guess just explain what that's going to be in layman's terms so people understand what this new endeavor is for the district.
Thank you for that question and the opportunity to speak to that. So last year, I started the year before in May of the prior year, and it was evident to me that what we're doing is working. It's working for about 75% of our kids who are able to follow a traditional model of schooling. But it was evident that we're not reaching the other 25%. We've got some kids that we need to do a better job reaching and looking in different ways. And that conversation initially led me into an alternative education. And the more I researched, the terminology of alternative ed, it has a very negative connotation to it. And I knew that if we strictly built an alternative high school, that we wouldn't necessarily get our community and, more importantly, our students behind it. If we go to our students and say, you're not fitting this bill, but we're going to move you to an alternative school, it doesn't necessarily have that positive piece to it. And so with that being said, we went out to Elmira City School District and observed they had an academy called Express Academy. Their program, I believe, initiated as a result of COVID, and they were trying to address the homeschool population and bringing some of those kids back. And the more that my team learned about their model, it just seemed like the right fit at the right time to really help our students and increase our graduation rate, which we just went through that strategic planning process last year, and our number one goal is to increase graduation rate. And so this Cyclone Academy is keeping those students in mind. Our district has over 230 kids in homeschool. Our hope was to attract some of those parents and some of those kids that maybe suffer anxiety. We're going to be offering the program at 2:30. Students will be provided food and transportation. 2:30, kids will be welcomed in to receive a meal. They will leave that meal opportunity at 3 o'clock. They'll go to class from 3 to 5:30. Their focus will be one class on Monday and Wednesdays, another class on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and for kids that want, because we're working on not only credit accrual, we're also working for some of these kids that would be eligible for the program. We're looking at a credit recovery also. So we're working kind of at both angles. Those kids would be able to come in on Fridays as well to attend a computer lab setting where maybe they're working on an online class that we can have a coach in the room that can motivate them. You know, you're at 5% today. I want to see you get to 10% in this class, or I want to see you get to 15%. And so our hope is that we're going to be able to meet a need for our kids that was not able to be met in a traditional setting.
And how is the district paying for that extra?
So we're building that into our general budget. It was planned for this year. It was built in this year. We have, you know, as our teachers union president Kevin Todd said, we have tremendous staff that signed up to come forward. And, you know, I just did a video for them earlier this week, and I said, you know, it's not going to be perfect. This is something new. And so just like anything new, there's going to be bumps in the road, but we're going to work them out. And we are confident that we have the right staff on board with this initiative. We have our administrators on board with this initiative. And if we can get our community on board, and we will be the first in our region to offer something of this magnitude.
It'll be something for Watertown students, and if it's the first in the region, could that expand? Or can you take in students from other districts for that, or schools don't really work like that, do they?
You know, the governor is asking for districts to look at considerations and how they can share services to reduce the overall cost as she looks at looking at the foundation aid formulas. More information to come at a later point about that. But we just had a student last night graduate with our summer school cohort from South Jeff. So we're not opposed to looking at opportunities for what we would like to be the model for the region and how we can address this need and look at the impact and assess that as we go.
The homeschooling thing that you brought up is interesting. I want to ask you a question about that because a lot of schools are finding more students are being homeschooled. Is that a big number for you? I think it was 230?
It was 230. It was slightly
year?
higher during that last year. It was slightly higher during COVID.
Sure.
So that number has went down, but it's significantly higher. If you think of like our elementary schools, and I'll give Starbuck Elementary for example, we have more kids in homeschool than we have at that building. So anything we can do to bring those students back to school and where parents feel safe bringing them in, where students, you know, a lot of our students, you know, experiencing it as a former high school principal going through COVID, it wasn't our lowest level students that left, it was our higher level students. Some of them didn't see the relationship of earning a high school diploma, so trying to, you know, sell that to kids of how important it is to walk out with their high school diploma. Some kids made more money going to, you know, in the Keys, they made more money fishing. So trying to convince them the purpose of staying. And I think there's things as educators that we're constantly trying to evolve with making sure that whatever we're teaching, we're making it relationship-oriented, relational as far as what kids are learning in real life and in school, so that they can build those connections and they see the purpose of attending our school systems.
Give me some numbers on that with Starbuck. That's astounding. More kids are being homeschooled than in school. So what's
we
the
have
split?
just less than 200 kids at Starbuck Elementary School. And again, that building is growing. We're looking at building some special ed programs and looking into what we can do to kind of enhance. There is a building capacity at that building. It's not a large school. So that building is growing and they're doing amazing things. But when I just look at the number of homeschool kids compared to a school that we have, you know, students that are attending that school every day.
Is that a leftover from COVID, you think, or what are the reasons?
The number is definitely going down.
Yeah.
We have a lot of kids, middle school, high school, attending homeschool instruction for various reasons. Some of the reasons I've been told are anxiety reasons. Kids are suffering from anxiety. They're nervous to come back to a public setting. Our homeschool coordinator was successful over the last few weeks connecting with some of our homeschool families. I believe as of yesterday, the number was at 9. So 9 of those homeschool families are going to join us at Cyclone Academy for this upcoming school year. What we're offering them is a smaller class setting. Traditionally, our classrooms get over 23 in a class. These classes, we're going to try to keep at 15. We have special education services that are going to be provided at our Cyclone Academy. My hope is to really look at education in a more flexible kind of setting. And so we know what the traditional model looks like, and we're successful in getting 70-75% of our kids through that model. But my hope is that this Cyclone Academy not only benefits the students, but it benefits our adults. Adults that have committed to teaching in the Cyclone Academy have to teach in a project-based learning. So kids are going to be learning through hands-on experimental exercises. We're hoping that we see that carry over almost like a pilot into our school setting. My hope is that I see kids that are maybe a chem student that's working on a chemistry class in the Cyclone Academy. Maybe they're just not getting that lab experiment. And the teacher says, you know what, I really want you to join me tomorrow during my 5th period class. I want you to see this lab one more time, because I think if you see it one more time, you're going to get it, and it's going to connect. I see learning more flexible in that traditional model of you come to school at this time, you leave school at this time. This Cyclone Academy is going to be a different model, and it really is out of the box. We hired a social worker, a school counselor to work with our kids, because we know that some of our kids that are going to be in this program need not only services in school, but we also want to connect them to outside agencies so that their needs are being met.
The expectations out of schools has changed. It's not just going and learning, but you have to, and school districts are doing this everywhere, right? But you're feeding kids.
Yes.
You're providing mental health care for some kids. You're providing after-school activities for some kids. Really, schools are not only just education, but community centers. And is it difficult to handle all of those demands? Because it has evolved over the past decade, probably.
When I talk about square footage and space, those are things that have strained some of the buildings in a good way, but have taken spaces that typically have not been used. Our high school has a clothing exchange room. We had a student, last year I initiated the Student Advisory Council for the superintendent's level, and I had a student, Connor Brown, that said, I really want a vending machine. We have kids that don't have hygiene products, and maybe that's preventing them from coming to school. We not only purchased that hygiene vending machine for that student, it benefits all of our community, and it was a model, and we've had other districts reach out to us to see how we did that. This year, his goal is to move those hygiene vending machines to Case and also to Wiley, to remove some of the stigma that comes behind that. But I think even our Welcome Back Watertown that's taking place tomorrow at Case Middle School, there's going to be a clothing exchange. We're handing out school supplies. We have barbers in our community that have offered to do haircuts for kids. We're offering transportation from elementary schools, so those parents that maybe don't have transportation, we want to remove any barrier possible to learning. And is it challenging at times? I'd lie if I didn't say yes to that.
It's got to be.
But it's an exciting opportunity. As I said to our mayor and our city manager, if our schools are not thriving, our city is not going to thrive. And so we have a very important role. And all of my staff, regardless if you're the custodian, you're the principal, you're a teacher, you're an aide, to the superintendent or assistant superintendent or board of education, all of us take our job seriously, and we're here for kids.
Cell phones in classrooms. The governor is addressing that, listening to her around New York State. Are you among those listening, or do you have an opinion on where cell phones should be in the classroom with kids? So
I want to thank Troy Decker, the superintendent of Indian River, facilitated the meeting with the governor. Initially, we thought it was going to be a conversation on cell phones and foundation aid formulas, and thankfully it was solely focused on cell phones, which they did a great job having a cross-representation of parents, board members, superintendents, building principals. They had students attend that conference at the base with the governor. And it was interesting to hear the perspectives on cell phones. The governor's concerned about the mental health of our students, sorry, I meant to say youth, with cell phones. We see a negative impact in schools, to be honest with you. We have students, they have a piece of technology that, in my opinion, they don't understand the long-term ramifications of the use of cell phones. We do have instances where students are communicating for unhealthy reasons on their cell phones on school campuses. It is not unheard of for students to use those technology devices outside of the school setting and them come in the next day and impact after a long weekend and negatively impact teaching and learning. Our teachers union president said something that I'm going to be stealing for my welcome back speech for staff next week. And he said to the governor, he said, the superpower of our students and our teachers is their relationships with one another. And unfortunately, cell phones sometimes negatively impact that relationship. We have students that aren't wanting to give eye contact. We have students that aren't able to carry full conversations. We have students that are not able to write in complete sentences. And when we put our teachers in a place where they have to ask a student to retrieve their cell phone in order to limit that barrier to learning, it really puts teachers and staff in an odd place. This year I decided to send my welcome back letter to students and to their parents and guardians for K-8. I'm asking that there are no cell phones. I want them out of sight and mind. I understand that parents need to communicate with kids. There are after-school plans that maybe change. We have kids that do different extracurricular activities after school. But what I'm asking as the superintendent is those cell phones are put away during the school day, kindergarten through 8th grade, so that they're not a distraction. And then for our high school students, we're using a traffic light pattern. That's where my opinion becomes a little mixed. We do have high school students that use their cell phones, many of them that use it appropriately, and it can enhance learning. And then we have other circumstances where maybe they could be used in a more appropriate manner. Where I become a little bit more conflicted at the high school level is that our job as high school educators is to prepare our students for a world outside our classroom walls, our building walls. And if we strictly say put the phone away, I don't believe personally that we're teaching them how to manage that device in a healthy manner. But again, to what you were saying earlier with other responsibilities that schools have taken on, that burden and that personal belief with me where I struggle is that now we're asking adults and teachers to actually take on that additional responsibility. And how do we teach kids how to use their phones responsibly? Many employers, as you know, are looking up social media accounts. And kids are posting things that may adversely affect them getting into the college or the workforce that they're hoping to enter into. And so my larger concern with the cell phones to align with kind of the governor's thought process on this is that kids sometimes are making choices on those personal devices that they're not thinking long term. And so that's where my concern would lie. This year, though, with the cell phones, we've got them out of sight, out of mind, K-8. Which is what we had last year, but I didn't publicly come out and say that. And so I had some principals last year that took the heat for taking that on by themselves. And I said, as a superintendent, it's important for me to send a consistent message to our constituents of what my belief is and what my policy is as far as cell phones at the elementary, middle school level.
So they still have them, they're just out of sight, out of mind. It's not taken or anything like that. Okay.
Yeah, many of the districts are considering the Yonder boxes or pouches.
Sure.
Which at a smaller school district, it makes sense. But if there's a will, there's a way, and kids can find creative ways to get beyond those Yonder pouches, to use them indiscreetly. And so to make that significant, I think those are to the tune of $100 a piece, significant purchases. At our high school, at almost 1,200 kids, how would you manage collecting 1,200 Yonder pouches throughout the day? And more importantly, making sure that the students get their phone, their property back at the end of the day, and they get it the way that they turned it in.
Interesting information. Thanks for taking time and coming in and talking with us. Best of luck with the new school year.
Thank you.
All right. Appreciate it.
We're excited.
All right.